Hello everybody, welcome back to The Hobby Musician. You're joining us as we work our way through a mini-series where we're building a guitar from a kit. And if you want to get caught up on any of the previous episodes, or if you just want to jump around to the different phases of this build, click the link at the top and that'll take you to a playlist where you can see all the episodes. Today's project is going to be wiring. We're going to be installing all the pickups and getting everything connected, but it's going to be on the shorter end of a video, and here's the reason. This kit has a specific kind of reality that I wasn't anticipating when I ordered it, so I want to talk you through that. I received the kit and I was unpacking it, checking all the parts. I was checking the body, the neck, everything, and when I went to check the pickups and the pick guard and all of that, I made a discovery. In fact, I pulled out the pick guard, and you can see here, I noticed that the folks at the factory, the company that I bought this from, they had already installed the pickups into the faceplate. I thought, well, that was nice. That kind of makes things easier. And then I looked, well, the pots were there and the switch was already there. And then I turned it over to the back, and to my delight and my surprise, they had already pre-wired all of the pickups to the switches, to the pots, and so much of the work was done for me. Now, I just want to be clear. If you're considering buying a kit, you can find all sorts of options when it comes to this. Some companies explicitly offer as one of the purchase options. Do you want them to pre-wire it for you? Or if you want to do it yourself, you can uncheck those or read in the description, the product details, and you'll figure out if this was included or not included. I'll just be honest with you, I don't think I read enough, and I wasn't expecting it, but I was pleasantly surprised. So you could be asking yourself, well, what if you want to learn all about soldering? Well, up here, as I'm talking, I'm going to put some links to some of our other episodes. We have done a number of really in-depth soldering episodes. So if you want to check those out, you can get a full kind of deep dive into all of the things you need to know about soldering if you check out one of those episodes. Well, there's only a few connections left to make, the ones that you really just couldn't make before the paint goes on and all of this kind of stuff. So that's what we're going to do today. And I thought, because it's a shorter episode, I'm going to take the time to share with you a pro tip. Now, I want to give a huge shout out to a good personal friend of mine and a friend of the channel, Randy Race. Now, Randy, I've had the great pleasure of playing with him for years. He's a fantastic guitarist and a really, really experienced luthier. He's been accumulating, tools and all kinds of gear over decades and has built many guitars, done repairs. He knows his stuff. And some of those episodes that I put links up here, he was watching those and he gave me some feedback. And he said, here's a couple of tips that you might want to share with your viewers if they're looking to do some soldering projects of their own. And the biggest tip is what I'm going to share with you today. His tip, he said, anytime you're working with hot soldering, irons and stuff on your guitar, if you're doing a small job or a total pickup swap, the tip is always keep your tools off to the side on your working hand, off to the side, and never travel over the body of the guitar. This is what I mean. I'm a right-handed person. So if I'm going to be working on this guitar, for example, I have everything set up on my right side. Now, in addition to that, when I get the camera all switched and we're ready to start, I've even got extra towels that I'm going to lay over and protect the body. But what Randy was saying is sometimes if you put your tools over in another space, so for example, if I put the soldering iron up here, I'd have to reach the iron and pull the iron with the cord and everything over the body of the guitar, work in it and put it back, and that just increases your chances of catching on something or messing something up, or just dripping maybe a little last piece of solder right onto the body of the guitar and putting a burn mark in it. We don't want that. So Randy's advice is always keep your tools off to the side and don't travel over the guitar any more than you have to. I have to get over here to work there, but then when I put it back, I'm not going to catch it on anything. So with that out of the way, I'm going to stop right now. I'll get the camera switched up, zoomed in, and we'll get to work on the very few connections that we need to make. All right, hang tight. All right, everybody, we're all set up here. And as you can see, I've kind of updated and got everything ready like I was describing a second ago. I've got the towel, my extra towel kind of covering the bottom part of the body here. I've got the pickup guard, you can see here, I've got it flipped over because the way this is ultimately going to go, once I make my connections, I want to make them and solder things in place so that I can flip this over and then it'll be oriented the right way so that it fits in the cavity. So that's why I have this here. Now, I said I don't have to do too many connections. There are only going to be 3 things that I need to do today. One of them is kind of an additional thing that I added to this, and I'm actually going to take care of that first. The first thing that I'm going to do is I am going to connect a grounding wire to this copper shielding that you see here. I've taken copper tape and applied it, kind of covered the bottom of this entire cavity, but in order for the shielding to be effective, I need to electrically connect this copper cavity to the same ground circuit that the pickups are on. That way it actually, physics kind of comes together to make this Faraday cage that's going to help shield our electronics. And on this particular setup, particular configuration, the back of this volume pot is where where everything else is grounded. So I'm actually going to run an extra piece of wire. This is a just leftover wire that I've had from other projects. I'm going to solder one end to this copper shielding kind of down here on the cavity, and then I'm going to run the wire up here and we're going to solder it to the back of the cavity with everything else. So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to do the soldering to the cavity so it's kind of fixed in place and it'll make it a little easier. I'm leaving way more wire than I actually need, so I can cut it to the length that I need in a second here. So 1 second, I'm just going to get this kind of propped and wedged where I want it, and that's close enough. And I can use the tip of the soldering iron as well. And just like we said at the beginning, I'm going to use kind of that pro tip. So I'm coming over here from the right side. Again, I got the soldering wire in my right hand, and I've got the solder in my left. Now, as we say in all of our videos, when you're soldering, I know this particular one's hard to see on the camera, you actually hold the tip of the soldering iron to the wire and let the solder flow into it. So that's what I'm doing on the inside here. I'm actually pushing the tip of the soldering iron into the wire to start heating up that wire. I'm holding it against the side so that when the wire gets hot, it's also going to share and spread that heat to the copper shield. And then when it gets hot enough, I'm touching the solder to the wire, and it won't flow until it's hot enough to actually begin the soldering process. And right now you can see that smoke coming out. That is working, and we got it. So that, and I'm going to wipe off any additional solder that I got on there. And that now is connected to the copper shielding for this cavity. So like I just said, what I want to do is I want to kind of eyeball this. I don't mind if I get a little extra wire. That's okay for me. So I want to just kind of hold this up, and as we said, this is going to end up flipping this way. So if I can get it so that it's long enough, to make the connection here, when I flip it, I'm not actually going to be stretching it. I'll probably just I'll be, coiling it up on the inside, which is okay. So right now, I think what I want to do, I can see I've got about this much. So like I said, I'm eyeballing this. So I'm going to snip the wire right here. And you can use whatever you want. If you have real wire snips, I just grab these needle nose pliers. I might need them later. And then I'm going to very carefully, and I know I'm using a box cutter to do this, but if you're stripping the ends of your wire, they make the specific wrenches that you can use for that. I do recommend be safe with this. Just so you know, I've done this enough times. I feel really comfortable using a knife like this, but just be careful if you're still new to it. Okay, so I've got the wire strip. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to hold this here. You might be able to see this one better. So I'm going to move this
You know, soldering is always tricky because you're constantly playing this game. You got to hold things where they need to be, and there's always just one or two extra things that need to be held. So while I'm getting this sort of in place, the trick is, just remember, if you're new to soldering, the back of these pots are a very common place that people will wire whatever they want to be the ground. So one of the other connections we're going to make just after this is finished is I am going to ground the whole system. But right now I'm just adding a wire to the ground that they've already done. So once again, I'm just holding the tip of the soldering iron. It's wiggling around on me. I'm holding the tip of the soldering iron, trying not to touch any of the other wires, any of the other connections. This is really squirrely because maybe I can get this here. Maybe I can get this here. There we go. Well, almost. Because it's a much better connection. So I'm holding down the tip and I'm coming in with the soldering wire in my left hand, and only when there's enough heat running up the end of the wire will this solder start to melt, and that will tell me that I'm really making a good soldering joint to the back of this pot. Now, almost. Oh. And that happens sometimes. You get a good solder joint, and then you just take your things away a split second before the solder cools enough, and then everything comes with you. So there. And I'm holding it in place. You can see right there. I had to hold it. I mean, it's kind of a delicate dance that you're playing with this solder. If it's too hot, it's not holding anything. So then it'll pop out. But there we go. Okay. We have now officially added this wire that's going to ground our cavity. So the next thing that I'm going to do, I said there are only a couple of things. I need to run these two wires to the output jack. So when you plug in the instrument cable, you need the signal that you're generating. You know, you're strumming these, and they're sending a signal from the pickups through all your electronics out through your instrument cable. That's got to get to your effects, and it's got to get to your amp. So this has to get fed to that output jack, which is down here on the bottom. And the way this particular configuration is, there's a hole right down here in this cavity that will feed to it. So I'm going to take both wires, and I know the black wire is my ground wire and the white wire is my signal wire. So I'm going to feed them both through this little hole, and I'm just going to feed as much as will go. Just however much will feed, I'm going to feed it through. And actually, I think I'm going to try to get my hand underneath here, and if I can pull a little more, I'm going into the cavity on the back side of this, and I can kind of, yep, I can feel the tip. I got to get a hold of them though. It's a little tricky there. Okay, kind of got a hold of them. There they are. All right, one of them. I got one of them. So I'm pulling that through. The last wire, the last thing that we have to do is the overall ground. And we're going to ground this to the claw of the tremolo. And that's a very common thing to do. A lot of Strats do that, especially things with this Floyd Rose, tremolo setup. So then I'm going to feed this one through a different hole, which will then push it all the way down through to the back of the guitar. And with feeding both of these wires through, and I'm going to, same thing, I'm going to use my fingers, and this time really easy to grab it. I'm going to start to flip this electronics cavity, and you can notice I'm feeding things through. Because everything else was already soldered, all I need to do right now, I'm just going to pop this cavity down into place. It's going to hold out of my way so that I can work. I can flip the guitar over. It's not going to pop out too easily. And you can see I'm really trying to feed that extra wire out of the way. And this is it. If I pop this down, you can see that the pick guard here is really, it's nice and kind of, well, almost spring loaded. It's really fit well, cut well. And there's my shielding ground wire. I'm going to pop that in there. I can pop that down on the neck, and this right then, just the tension right up here, this pick guard holding right there, I can now very carefully and very gently flip. I'm going to hold it, and once I put the pressure down now on the back side here, you can see here's the wire I fed through for a grounding claw, and I'm going to get, I'm going to get my needle nose pliers. And then these, I got one wire pulled through, but then I'll pull the other wire through. These are the two wires that we fed through for our signal. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do next. I want to ground this entire circuit to the claw. So this is the claw, and the first thing that I did this before I started filming. I actually took some sandpaper. You can use a file, like a metal file if you had, and I sanded and scratched up the surface of this little nub in the middle. This is going to get installed this way, and I've already pre-drilled the holes for it, but when it gets installed, what basically what you can do is you can feed this wire up through, and the scratching off of this surface will get us down to the better bonding surface, which will let the solder and everything stick to it. So what I'm planning on doing here is I am going to feed this wire like I did through the hole, and I want to see if it's long enough to come off. It's not quite long enough, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to bunch up this towel. I'm actually going to do the soldering directly onto the towel. I don't want to run the risk of putting this metal claw piece directly onto the body and then starting to heat up and solder this wire and accidentally let that heat transfer. I don't want to burn any of this. So this towel is going to help be a little bit of a barrier, and I'll try to get it turned here so you can see. But it really is. I'm going to use the same technique that I did on the other connections that we made. I'm going to line up the wire where I want it to go, and I'm going to take the tip of the soldering iron with all the heat, and I'm going to press down and hold down just the tip of the wire and start. Okay, so now the heat is slowly, it's kind of transferring through the wire, it's transferring down to the plate. And then once it gets hot enough, I'll know it's hot enough because it will start to draw the solder off of the spool that I've got, and it'll let it flow down. A couple things to keep in mind. Sometimes depending on the thickness of the wire and how well you're connecting the tip of the soldering iron, it can take a little bit of time to go. And you can see it's starting to go. It's not quite flowing down to the plate below it yet. So I've still got some time here. I gotta let this flow, and I'll start to see it pool up a little more on the bottom. There we go. So the tip, it took a little work here. So I'm going to add a little bit more to the side. I want to make sure that I got a really good connection there. There we go. Okay. So now we have the overall guitar ground. And I got to be careful. I don't want to just go right to grabbing that just in case there's too much heat there. But right there you can see we have got the whole thing ready to go. Actually, it's warm. It's not terrible, but it is a little warm. And yeah, and we've got that all soldered and connected there. And then the excess wire can just coil up underneath the springs. This is going to have those tension springs that'll help hold the strings onto the guitar. So that's fine for that. So I'm gonna just put that back in the cavity just for now. And the last thing that we need to do is down here in this output jack or input jack. I mean, you're inputting the cable. But there's one last little pro tip for you. When I started doing some soldering, I realized very quickly needle nose pliers are great, but you can see here even needle nose pliers may be gigantic when it comes to the small little nooks and crannies that you're going to need to get into. So I have the tiniest little tips of these wires, and down in the cavity here, I have to get these looped through the terminal, the posts that they need to be connected to. And the best way to do these kinds of things really is bend little hooks. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to try to bend a little hook into the wire like that. And then I'm going to feed and fish the wire with that hook. It'll go through the little hole, and if everything is done right, it'll hold itself, or better, well, it'll be better at holding itself down in there. So I'm going to bend another little hook into this one. I'm actually going to do the black wire first. The black wire was our grounding wire, and that, on this particular jack, this output jack, is the longer of the two posts. So right now, down in there, I can kind of see, and I'm using my tweezers to kind of help hold and move that hook into place. And so here's what I'm going to do. It is now wedged. I've got that wedged down, and I'm actually going to push. Yeah, I'm going to push that wire. No, I'm not. I had to change my mind. I'm going to pull the extra wire. Oh, and it came out. I'm going to pull the extra wire kind of above it. And so this way, I'm going to take my soldering iron, and this one, there's very little, so I'm just going to be really careful when I go in here. But I need to come directly down on top of this. And this is going to be, it's just always tricky when you're working in tight spaces, but I'm coming down and I'm touching the top of the wire, and I'm going to bring and draw, hold on. Yeah, I've got the tip of the wire now, and I'm going to draw. It's now kind of transferring that heat, and when it's hot enough, I'll know it when it starts, when the solder starts flowing, and it just did. Okay, so with tiny connections like this, one thing that I always do is I'll let the smoke clear a little bit, and then I always need to go back and I'll bring like a flashlight in before I close everything up for good. I just want to make sure that, you know, maybe the tip of that didn't pop out, or I just put a dollop of solder and the wire's not even connected to it. Those are things that you do want to check. And even without coming back with a flashlight, I can see down in here, I've got a nice smooth kind of pool, and I can see the tip of that wire sticking out there. So that looks like a good connection. So now, once again, for the very last thing that we need to do, I'm going to take this signal wire, and I'm going to get it connected to, or I'm going to loop it through it, I should say, is probably a better way to say it. I'm going to loop it through the hole in the post and try to get it so that the hook itself is essentially just holding the wire in place. And I think I got it. Okay, good. It's kind of wedged, so the hook is holding itself through there. And now, once again, I'm just going to be very careful. I'm going to go down on top of this, and by touching the wire, I'm going to, yep, I got the tip of the wire, and now I'm going to let that heat transfer through the wire. And while it's kind of heating up, I'm going to come in here from the side, there, and I'm going to let that flow. There we go. Think I'm going to double check once again, let the smoke kind of clear, and there it is. We can see, even looking in here, the white wire is kind of on that shorter inner post, and then the black wire is connected to the outer ring of the jack. And what you can do in both cases, now I know that on the back side we've got this faceplate on. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to push. I'll use the tweezers, and I'm just going to push some of this excess wire back through the hole. Now, you don't have to get crazy. This is going to be covered up ultimately, so you won't see in here. But if you don't want to have gobs and gobs of extra wire just coiled up around places, this is a way that you can kind of tidy up how things look inside there. So it's an easy thing to do. And the way I'm looking at it, even the two wires in here, you can see that they do kind of loop away from each other. So I think that's actually good. So with that, everybody, that's actually all we have to do. As a quick recap, we just did our cavity. We took our copper shielding and we grounded that on the front side, and then we fed the overall grounding wire to the back, and then we wired it up to the jack, and we are ready to go. So I'll get the camera switch back up and we'll close this episode out.
Well, there you have it, everybody. We're all done with the wiring on this guitar. Because they did so much of that wiring for us at the factory, we just had to make those 3 little simple connections and we're all set. And in closing, I want to thank Randy again for that pro tip of always keeping your tools off to one side and protecting the body when you're doing some soldering work. And I just got to say, if you're building a guitar, if you've seen us do these projects in the past, I just really start to get excited at this phase, because you can see here, once the wiring and once all of that stuff goes onto the guitar, I know it's still missing some parts, but for me, it always really starts to look like a guitar at this phase, and that just makes me excited to keep going. So I hope you got something out of today's episode, and as always, thanks for watching, and until next time, play on, my friends, play on.